Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. We are here. It is finally playoff time in the NBA. The matchups are set. We can actually do a preview. The play-in is over with. And now all that's left is for us to give our predictions, Sap.
Yeah, looking forward to it. It's going to be interesting what happens here. I mean, we have our picks. We've been making them throughout the year where, a couple of weeks ago you declared that no one's going to beat Brooklyn in the East and no one's going to beat the Lakers in the West and no one's going to beat Brooklyn in the finals. So now that we finally have the matchups, we can hone in kind of like the coaches and players. Now we can delve through these matchups, which some of them look to be lopsided and some of them look to be intriguing.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not gonna suddenly change course here, Sap, and say, well, actually, I don't think Brooklyn's going to get to the
Mhm.
finals. I mean, I'm going to stick with what I've said for months out. That was the purpose of picking those things months out, so I look really smart when they actually happen.
Yeah, I may be differing from you in the Eastern Conference, but let's get to it. We'll figure out how I got there.
Is it because you want to be contrarian, Sap, or because you actually believe that another team is going to get there?
Probably both. How's that sound? I'm
That
copping
sounds.
out. I'm pulling a Glenn Woodway. I'm sitting on the fence.
I noticed that you didn't say that in the Western Conference because you can't
No,
go against your guy. Cannot
no.
go against your guy. So yeah, we'll do the we'll start with the Eastern Conference as the Pacers decided to bow out and get their asses kicked by the Washington Wizards. So the Wizards are the 8th seed. That was not a very fun game to watch.
No, I mean, it worked out fine in the Eastern Conference, right? The Celtics, who were the 7th seed going into the play-in tournament, won their game, so they're the 7th seed. Washington lost to the Celtics, but then beat Indiana. So it played to form in the Eastern Conference with the home teams winning the three matchups. And I'm glad it's Washington instead of Indiana. But, Indiana plays absolutely no defense. They played a very fast pace. But I would rather watch Russell Westbrook and Bradley Beal for 4 or 5 games against Philadelphia than Domantas Sabonis, who's the best player on Indiana. No disrespect to him. He made the All-Star team this year. But Westbrook's always fun to watch because there's a lot of drama when he's out there, whether he's just going crazy, putting up a triple double, or bowing out like he did in the second half of the Celtics game. So that's not going to be an interesting series, but I do enjoy watching Westbrook and I'll enjoy watching Beal.
So do you want to start with that series then, Sap? The
Sure.
1 versus 8. We could since we were just talking about the Wizards. The 76ers uh were jockeying between the 3 and 1 position all year long. They ended up with the 1 seed, which we both agree is wildly important for them to avoid having to play Milwaukee and Brooklyn.
Hmm.
That they just have to play one of them and that they get home court throughout for a team that has been tremendous at home and so on the road, especially last year where they were downright awful on the road and pretty much unbeatable at home. Really important that they did get that 1 seed. The Wizards, we talked about them a little bit previewing the game they had with the Celtics, that they've been really hot. They obviously did not look good in that game against Boston, but they have been playing pretty good basketball as of late. That being said, I still really don't expect this to be much of a series. I'm going to say Philly in 5 games.
Yeah, I'd say 5 because Westbrook and Beal can go off and win one game. And Philadelphia does have a tendency from time to time to zoning out a little bit. At times, Joel Embiid zones out a little bit. But where exactly is Washington going to be able to combat Joel Embiid? And then you've got Ben Simmons who can guard multiple positions. Maybe he'll wrap up Westbrook for a period of time or Bradley Beal for a period of time. I agree. It's going to be a 5-game series. Philadelphia is too good.
Yeah, I could even see it being, a sweep if Philadelphia goes up, 3-0. I don't see that the Wizards are going to have any sort of fight to force it to a game 5 and have to go fly back to Philadelphia after that. So it could be 4, it could be 5. There's no way I see it going any further than that. I think that Joel Embiid should be able to just do whatever the hell he wants. Who's going to even threaten him a little bit on Washington?
No,
So
it's a one-sided series.
typical 1-8 matchup, I think. Though I agree with you, Sap, that it is more interesting because it's the Wizards and they do have 2 All-Star players, and I know Westbrook wasn't an All-Star this year, but typically he is, and the Pacers are not a particularly exciting team. So at least that gives us more fun players to watch, but not much of a series there. So we'll just keep going in order then, Sap. And we talked about this series the other day. 2-7 is Brooklyn Boston. I think this is a sweep. I really do. The more I think about it, I have Brooklyn winning the championship. Boston's gotten their asses kicked every single time they've played Brooklyn. They haven't played them even at full strength, and they've gotten their asses kicked. And the Celtics are without Jaylen Brown. If they take a game, I think they would be very lucky.
I think they'll take one game again because I don't think they're going to load manage the Brooklyn Nets are, but they may watch a few minutes, depending on if they get up 3-0 in the series. And I think Jason Tatum's quite capable of having a couple of huge games because they don't have a real rim protector, Brooklyn, so he should be able to get to the basket and to the free throw line at a pretty consistent pace. But Brooklyn's just too good. I'm going to say 5 games. I'll give the Celtics one that win one of the games at home. I mean, if they had Jaylen Brown and if Robert Williams III was healthy, maybe they make it a 6-game series, but I can't see this really being much of a series unless the Celtics can steal one of 2 at the Barclays Center and get Brooklyn on their heels a little bit. Other than that, I see a 5-game series.
Sap, do you think that that Brooklyn is coming in a little bit under the radar more than they should because they've had these injuries, or do you think that everybody's just all in on them?
No, they're consensus team to win the East. They're the betting favorite to win the NBA title. They've assembled these 3 guys for this time of year. I don't think they're flying under the radar. I think Milwaukee and maybe even Philadelphia, despite being the number 1 seed, are flying under the radar a little bit, but everyone's on board that Brooklyn is going to win the East, although I may be a little bit different. I'll divulge that probably in the next 7 or 8 minutes.
So would you say that Brooklyn has the biggest target on their back of any team in the playoffs, or you still think that's the Lakers?
Well, it's the Lakers because they're the defending champs and because it's LeBron, because he's the guy he's not just competing against the other players in the NBA. He's competing against a ghost at this point, right? And Michael Jordan. That's what he is measured
still
by.
Alive.
Michael Jordan is still alive. Yes, we saw him last weekend at the Hall of Fame ceremony. He didn't speak much. Looked pretty cool, like Michael Jordan always does. He carries the bald head and earring, silver suit. Michael Jordan, one of the most fashionable men on earth, always looks great. So Haynes. LeBron is dealing with that. Hanes underwear, let's hope, right? Because that's what he pushes. I don't know if he wears them. He probably wears silk underwear or a higher grade of underwear. Maybe too much information at this point. But yeah, there's a lot of pressure on LeBron, obviously, because it's now, okay, is he as great as Michael Jordan? Is he going to win a 5th championship? All that stuff. But Brooklyn's under a load of pressure. I mean, just think back to the first year that LeBron was with Chris Bosh and Dwayne Wade. The Heat were under the most pressure and they couldn't deliver. They lost in the finals to Dallas. Golden State, when they added Durant, they were under a ton of pressure and they were able to win back-to-back championships. I mean, there are a few teams in the league that we think can really win a championship. Brooklyn, if they don't get to the championship and win it, it's going to be a major disappointment for that organization. And I think that that's what they're dealing against and dealing with at this present time. But I don't think they're going to have any problem with the Celtics. It should be like you say, you think it's going to be a sweep. I think it's going to be a gentleman's sweep.
Yeah, the reason, Sap, I'm asking that question about the biggest target on their back is obviously, the defending champion is always going to have a massive target on their back. But I do wonder how other players in the league feel about how Brooklyn was constructed and, that it is has much more of the appearance of a super team than the Lakers. Mm-hmm. I mean, granted, LeBron and AD, when they're both healthy, are probably both top 5 players. LeBron certainly is. And that, instead of 2, there's 3 of those types of guys in Brooklyn. So I do wonder if that rubs players the wrong way. Maybe they don't care about it. I mean, it's been a long time since I've interviewed an NBA player. The last one I interviewed was Alex Caruso a year ago, and I didn't really ask because James Harden wasn't on that team yet, so I didn't really ask him about it.
I mean, I think maybe Russell Westbrook is turned off by that because Westbrook is turning into the Ricky Henderson of basketball. Like, I wouldn't be shocked if Washington traded Russell Westbrook this offseason to get rid of his contract.
I'd say more likely than not. probably.
Right. I mean, he's going to be a guy who's going to play probably on 3 more teams before it's over, kind of like Ricky Henderson or Bobby Bonds, not Barry Bonds, but Barry's dad,
Chris
Bobby
Paul
Bonds.
too, sort of turning
Chris
into that a little
Paul's
bit.
been going on multiple teams too. Yeah, because the contract is so huge. And then you realize, well, this guy can't put us over the top. So let's get younger. Maybe you move him for draft choices or a couple of veterans, whatever it may be. That's the offseason. But I don't think most of the top players are turned off by it because they're on board with it. Like, how could LeBron, with a straight face, say, well, they formed the super team in Brooklyn when he was part of a super team in Miami, not quite as talented as this one because Wade was on the back nine and Chris Bosh was never at the level of these 3 players in Brooklyn. I mean, Kyrie's a unique case because when he's locked in, he's absolutely phenomenal. Not at all times locked in, though. How can anybody that plays on Golden State right now, could Steph Curry say, I can't believe that's an incredible team that they built in Brooklyn?
Right.
I'm turned off by that when he recruited Durant to join a 73-win team. So I don't think the top players are turned off by it, with the possible exception of maybe Russell Westbrook, maybe Dame Lillard, who seems like he's committed to spend his entire career in Portland. Maybe those types of players are turned off by it, but I don't think it's a big deal. I think they have an incredible amount of pressure on them, though, because especially James Harden. I mean, James Harden is probably facing more pressure than any player in the postseason. He's never won a championship. He did go to one final, but he was coming off the bench with OKC in his 3rd year as the main guy in Houston. He couldn't deliver a title there or even get to the finals. And now he's playing with Kevin Durant and Kyrie Irving. If he doesn't get to the finals, he's going to be perceived as the problem because, look, Durant has 2 titles. Kyrie has a title. Harden doesn't. So he's facing an incredible amount of pressure individually and team-wise.
Yeah, and Harden, he specifically picked the Nets to go to.
Yep.
He forced his way onto that team by essentially eating his way out of Houston and strip clubbing his way out of Houston, whatever the verb would be for that, I guess. And so yeah, I agree with you. There's a ton of pressure on Harden, and maybe more pressure on him than anybody in the playoffs.
I think so. I mean, again, LeBron's chasing a ghost, so we'll put him aside, right? Because
his legacy is set.
It's already formed. He's at worst, in most people's opinions, the 2nd greatest player ever, right? Like, but jumping from 2nd to 1st, that's pretty awesome, right? If he's able to pull that off. And even Charles Barkley the other night, yesterday, was on with Stephen A. Smith on ESPN. He said, look, if LeBron wins the West and beats Brooklyn in the finals, 5 championships, we have to revisit the conversation of LeBron maybe being the GOAT. And of course, Stephen A. Smith has made it known that at no point will LeBron ever surpass Michael Jordan, which I think is lunacy. I mean, if LeBron gets to 6 titles, he'll have as many titles as Jordan, and the rest of his resume is more impressive. Going to the finals and losing is better than losing in the conference finals or losing in the 2nd round. It just is.
Rob Parker disagrees with you.
Rob Parker, apparently Stephen A. Smith, and a few other people think that going to the finals and losing is a bad year. Okay, Michael Jordan 6-0 in the finals. If LeBron gets the 6 titles with 6 losses in the finals, that means he'd gone to the finals 12 times. Do we hold it against Tom Brady that he lost 3 Super Bowls? Hell no. That's what makes
Rob Parker
even more
does.
amazing. Yeah, absolutely. He said, no, Joe Montana 4-0. In no one's brain is 7-3 not better than 4-0. It'd be like if you went to school, right, and Joe Montana got 4 A's, but then a bunch of C's and D's. Tom Brady has 7 A's and 3 B pluses. That much better grades. Or if you're an Olympian and you have 7 golds and 3 silvers, isn't that better than just 4 golds? I don't know. That's too logical for maybe Rob Parker, Ben Volen, Stephen A. Smith, or all of these idiots to understand, including Skip Bayless, who continues to blurt out 6-0. Well, if LeBron gets to 6, I don't have to hear that anymore. So he's facing a lot of pressure. But in terms of building a legacy, yeah, James Harden's facing more than anyone else.
Well, that's why the Celtics have been so great, Sap, is that they are undefeated in the finals in the past decade. They don't ever get there, but they never lose. If you never get there, you never lose, Sap. That's the key.
Hey, I'd rather go on one date with Scarlett Johansson than no dates with Scarlett Johansson. It may not end in marriage or anything else, but I can always tell people I went on one date with Scarlett Johansson. That's more impressive than not going at all.
That's true. I mean, I've never understood that logic. I mean, because there is no logic there, so it's hard. You can't really comprehend it. The last thing I want to say about this Nets Celtics series, because I know we've talked about it a lot already, is that sort of echoing what your point is about how you don't think players really care that much about how the Brooklyn team was conceived. If I was the Celtics, I would care. If I was the players in the Celtics, it would piss me off to no end to see Kyrie Irving on the other side of that court. And my dad actually brought up this point when I was talking to him the other day. Remember preseason when Kyrie brought the sage into the garden and was,
Sure.
saging stuff? How did that not piss the guys on the Celtics off? Like, have some pride. He's saying that the arena was a problem. Everything else was the problem there. He wasn't the problem. Bad. He's got to get rid of the bad vibe. Screw that guy. That's what I would think if I was on the team. Screw this guy. He abandoned us, and he's putting all the blame on us. And the other day, he had a press conference where he's saying he couldn't be himself in Boston. They bent over ass backwards to accommodate him.
Well, if I'm a player on the Celtics, maybe I have more issues with Danny Ainge. Danny Ainge could have put together a deal to bring in Anthony Davis, albeit for 1 year, and that probably would have kept Kyrie Irving here. Or he could have put together a deal to get James Harden just several months ago, and he did neither. So if I'm a player, players aren't going to hold anything against other players because they're all friends. And Tatum idolizes Kyrie Irving. That's what it is now in the NBA. That's why you like Russell Westbrook so much, because he's angry at everybody. Sometimes he's angry at his own teammates. So he does bring in a different vibe than most of the players. But blame the general manager who didn't make the requisite moves to put them over the top. And this is what the NBA is now. Friends join forces, go play together. And then the part with James Harden, he just went to camp and said, I don't want to be here anymore, and decided to look like me, put weight on, he never shaves, didn't look like he showered. He's hitting strip clubs. And, he made himself a player that had to be traded. And, Danny Ainge could have maybe offered enough to get him, see what happens for 2 years with Tatum, maybe even keeps Brown, because I don't think the Nets gave up a ton to get James Harden, a lot of draft capital, which Danny Ainge never wants to part with. But if I'm on the Celtics now, more than being pissed at Kyrie Irving or James Harden or Kevin Durant or whoever, I might be pissed at my own general manager, say, well, some of these guys were available. Where were you?
It's like in football, people get all pissed off if in Dallas when somebody dances on the star or steps on the star and disrespects the logo. And hockey, you can't step on.
No,
God forbid you step on the spokes or anything like that in the Bruins locker room.
I did it once. They yelled at me.
Yeah, well, and then didn't a bunch of players get injured, Sap, after he did that?
I fought them all off. I took care of Chara. Was the first guy I went after, and didn't work out well for Zdeno Chara when I let loose. I've got quite a temper. No, I barely stepped on it. It was a crowded locker room. None of the players said anything. I think it was a PR assistant who said, try not to step on that. And I'm like, oh, no problem. I apologize.
It was just massive. I don't know how you avoid it.
Well, I don't have the best vision. You know that. I thought I was in the Blackhawks locker room.
Yeah. But I was saying, so, in other sports and in baseball, they're crazy with everything, unwritten rules and stuff. So if I'm a Celtic and I'm wearing a Celtic jersey and a guy comes in to my arena and sages it, that would piss me off. It pissed me off as a fan. So I just wish I saw more of them. I don't think the players of the Celtics hate Kyrie, but I really wish they would. I really wish they would. It would make the series a lot more interesting too.
You were probably going to be more keyed up for tomorrow night's game than most of the Celtics are. Because probably the Celtics look and say, how the hell are we going to beat this team? I mean, even Brad Stevens is saying, this is the best team I've ever seen assembled since I've been in the NBA. I don't know what the hell is how we're going to pull this off to beat them. You're going to be more keyed up for that game than half the Celtics. And you want to go after Kyrie Irving, and you're pissed that James Harden quit on the Houston Rockets and ended up in Brooklyn. It's just a different league. Just enjoy what it is now. I mean, you see Curry and LeBron embracing after the game, which I think is fine. I mean, look, I'll go back to the 80s. Before finals games, Magic Johnson and Isaiah Thomas kissed each other before the opening tap. Now, by the end of that series, they were, getting in each other's face because they're both uber competitive and there was a lot at stake. And then years later, their relationship was really fractured, and since it's been sewn up and they're back to being close friends. But yeah, I mean, that in the ideal world of competitiveness, yeah, Marcus Smart should have clotheslined Kyrie Irving his first trip to the basket, but that doesn't happen anymore. First of all, Marcus Smart would have been ejected and suspended and fined and lost all sorts of money. Yeah, well, you pay his fine and augment his salary of the 12 games he would have missed or whatever he would have missed for.
I'll tweet nice things about him though. That's my contribution.
That's nice. Yeah, you do that anyway.
Yeah, that's true. Typically I do. This season, less so.
Not so much.
So yeah, I mean, that's to beat a dead horse. I don't think this is going to be much of a series. It's playing out exactly like it has in my nightmares. Celtics get embarrassed by Kyrie and the Nets. Nets go on to play the Lakers in the finals. winner takes my soul, basically. I don't feel good about it
You
either
like
way.
Anthony Davis though, so root for the Lakers.
I'm not, no, because then they pass the Celtics. If this was you know what?
Don't worry about it.
If it was 2 titles ago for the Lakers, I'd have no problem, I think, rooting for them.
Do what every Celtics fan is going to do anyway. They're going to say, well, 5 of them were in Minneapolis
I
and
am.
only
I'm
13 were in LA. Yeah, you'll be on board with that. Yeah.
train. All on
Yeah.
board that train,
So
Sap.
we're just gonna whitewash George Mikan out of the history books, apparently.
I am. Well, no, I'm gonna give him his Minneapolis titles.
Yeah. Well, still the Lakers.
That's all I can do, Sap, is to do that, is to to try to block this out of my mind. So all right, let's go on. We'll proceed to the 3-6 series, which in my mind is the most interesting of all the series. I think in either conference, really.
Agree.
The Bucks and Heat in a rematch from the conference semifinals last year in the bubble, where the Heat upset the Bucks. The Bucks looking for revenge, not the same Bucks team as last year. The Heat started off slow, have gotten really hot towards the end of the year. Sap, I'll defer to you first. How do you see this one playing out?
I like Milwaukee in this series. I think it's their year. And also, if they can make a few adjustments in this series compared to the way they've played in the postseason the last several years, 2 years in a row, they had the best record in basketball and bowed out prematurely. 2 years ago, they lost in the conference finals to Toronto after having a 2-0 lead. Last year, they lost in the conference semifinals in 5 games to Miami, which wasn't really an upset. Miami really outplayed them during the regular season head to head, and Miami embraced the bubble. Milwaukee didn't embrace the bubble. I want to see less of Giannis bringing the ball up the court and running the offense through Giannis. I want to see Giannis get behind the wall, not try to fly over the wall. And by that, I mean, have him post up. He's nearly unstoppable posting up. He can also pass really well out of the post. So get him to post up when Miami's going to try to create this wall around Giannis. And then you get your spot up shooters, and then you've got Jrue Holiday and Chris Middleton, who are borderline all-star caliber players, right? I mean, you're a huge fan of Jrue Holiday. I like him a lot. And then go from there. If Giannis is initiating the offense, I think that's where they get bogged down. If they can make that slight adjustment, I think they win this series in 6 games. It's going to be tough because, Miami's not going to quit, especially with Jimmy Butler out there. It's going to be, I agree with you. This going into this series is the most intriguing, but I think Milwaukee, it's their year. And give Milwaukee an awful lot of credit. They could have sat their players in one of the last regular season games against Miami. And if Miami had won that game, they would have been either the 4 or 5 seed, and Milwaukee would have avoided them in the first round. Instead, Milwaukee played their guys, won, because they want to break through. And I think that's a good sign compared to what the Clippers did out west, which is try to, figure out how to avoid the Lakers at all costs. So I think Milwaukee's ready for this, and they're going to win in 6.
Yeah, I've said for a while now, Sap, I like that this Milwaukee team is under the radar versus past years. I think that it's the best roster Giannis has ever had around him. Mm-hmm. And what I think the real difference in this series will be from last year is that there's traveling and there's going to be fans. Yep. And that means that the role players or whatever you want to call them on Miami, the Duncan Robinsons, the Tyler Heroes, will have to perform on the road. And I think it was the bubble was a weird environment, but I think it was a pretty comfortable environment for those types of guys. And it's different. Shooting is different on the road than it is at home. And fans are different than no fans. I think the NBA obviously did a great job with the bubble last year, trying to create the best environment than they could, but it's no replicant for what playoff basketball is typically like. And we're still not going to see, I don't think 100% capacity, but it'll be closer to that. I think that, when you have young guys like the guys I mentioned, Hero, Robinson, I don't know if Precious Achiuwa was going to play much for Miami in this series, but he's been in their rotation. They struggle typically on the road in playoff series. I think we've seen that a lot in the NBA. And Milwaukee has home court advantage in this series. So I do think that that's going to be a big factor. You saw Robinson and you saw Hero have massive impacts last year when they played Milwaukee and when they played Boston as well to advance to the finals. It's just going to be a completely different animal this year with having to travel, back and forth Miami to Milwaukee, having to deal with fans, having to deal with more pressure in a fan-laden playoff environment. So I think that's where Miami might fall a little bit short, is the exceptional play they got out of their role players last year. I think that they're going to have a hard trying to duplicate that this year versus Milwaukee. They have more veteran role players on their team. They're not a young team. Milwaukee, you think of Miami as a veteran team because they have a bunch of veterans, but they do have a key contributors like Hero and Robinson who are very, very young. Milwaukee, I've said this before. I think they might be the best defensive team in basketball. Them are the Lakers in my mind.
Mhm.
Um, so I think they'll be able to figure out the 3-point shooting of Miami. I just think it's their time. And Miami was certainly a fly in their Super Bowl last year, but I think that they know how to beat them now. It's the best roster they have had. They have the home court, a true home court advantage because it wasn't in the bubble. So I agree with you, Milwaukee in 6. Um, but yeah, Miami's not going to make it easy on them, and certainly amongst the top 3 seeds, it's the most difficult opponent.
Yeah, no, it's a tough opponent for Milwaukee, but I think the Bucks are going to break through in this series and maybe a few others because they seem to be locked in. Giannis is healthier than he was last year. Remember, he was dealing with an ankle situation in the postseason, and they just didn't feel comfortable there. Some teams did, some didn't. I'm going with the Bucks in 6, but it's going to be an intriguing series to say the least.
Yeah, I think for Miami, the key to them winning is that they need Bam Adebayo to be great because they have a huge matchup advantage there. I mean, Brook Lopez is fine, but Bam Adebayo is a much
Hmm.
better player, so he needs to really dominate that matchup. I think everybody expects that Jimmy Butler will be fine and he'll be able. You've talked about this before, even when he's not going, he's doing something to help the team when he's
Yep.
not going offensively. Um, I don't think Miami will have enough scoring punch to beat Milwaukee based off of Milwaukee's defense and the role players I think being limited on Miami. Yeah, I think that it's if Milwaukee doesn't come out of this series, Sap, I don't know what they do going forward. I don't know how they approach it.
Yeah, I think the other player besides James Harden that's under the most pressure in the Eastern Conference is Giannis. I mean, he's the two-time defending MVP. Another great year. If he can't get through Miami this year, he would have gone from losing in the conference finals to losing in the second round to losing in the first round. That's not the direction you want to go. I know it took a while for Jordan to break through, but every year he got better. He got closer to getting to the finals. And then finally, when he got there, he broke through and beat the Lakers. And then, of course, won 5 more titles after that. I'm not trying to compare Giannis to Jordan, but the path to winning championships sometimes takes a little bit of time, but you got to show progress every year. If they lose in the first round to Miami, then they're going backwards. I also think of all the coaches in the Eastern Conference, Mike Budenholzer is facing the most pressure because if he loses in the first round, if I'm ownership
They're
management,
gonna
I'm going to
fire him.
say
Yeah.
they're going to fire him. We're going to move on to maybe a former player, or let's see what the situation is with Brad Stevens in Boston. Although that seemed to be a lateral move, you may want to bring in a former player because at that point, Budenholzer would have lost back-to-back series to Eric Spoelstra, and in both situations, Milwaukee has the better roster and has the best player on the court in Giannis. So this is a monster series for the Bucks. A lot of pressure on them.
Yeah, it's similar in a similar, but I guess a little bit of a less way. If if Miami loses, as we expect them to,
Hmm.
how do they take the next sort of leap to being a true championship contender? Do you think they could chalk it off and say we got we got a tough seeding because
Sure.
we started the year poorly? Because Butler is not a young guy, Sap, and he has a
No.
lot of minutes on him. So I know that they're always big game hunting in free agency, and they're always a destination. This isn't the greatest free agent class in the world, especially because most people expect Kawhi Leonard to just resign with the Clippers. Um, can Miami lose this series and still feel good about their future?
They can because they've got some really good young players, but their best player is now starting to enter the back nine. And Jimmy Butler is a guy who plays his ass off so much that, I don't know if he's going to play at this level into his mid to late 30s. I doubt it. But they are always a destination for free agents, but they have to do this quickly while they have Butler, while they have Adebayo under his first contract so that they can be a true contender because the East is that much stronger now because Brooklyn's not going anywhere with that big three. Philadelphia's got a dynamic duo in Simmons and Embiid, and a damn good third guy in Tobias Harris. and Milwaukee's got Giannis. So, to break through in the Eastern Conference is more difficult now than it was, say, a couple of years ago. Certainly last year when everything fell into place for Miami. But that's why this is going to be the most intriguing of the first round series, because, a pretty damn good team is going to be eliminated here. And, we think Milwaukee has a chance to get to the finals. Miami went last year and really showed pretty well in the finals against the Lakers, considering they had some injuries to deal with. So a really good team is getting knocked out here. And the one that does get knocked out is going to have a long off season, and they're going to have to make some decisions.
Yeah, that's why I look at it as the most intriguing series, Sap, is like you
Mhm.
said, a good team's going to be eliminated no matter what. And I think both teams will have to look long and hard at their roster should they lose in this series. One of them is going to obviously have to
Yep.
lose in this series. Miami has a short window because of Butler's age and minutes. And Adebayo, as much as I like him as a player, can't be the best player on a championship team. It's
No.
gone away from that. So yeah, I think it's gonna be tough for the loser to be able to live with that, especially like Miami. You said with Milwaukee, they would have been taking a step backwards. Going to being in the championship and taking 2 games off of the Lakers to losing the first round. I mean, that's a big tumble.
Mm-hmm. It sure is. Yeah, no matter any way you paint it, because you haven't advanced to the point where you did a year ago. But again, last year was different than this year, and I think Milwaukee's just, they're doing all the right things, and like you said, they play outstanding defense, and that's always a calling card when you get to the postseason.
Yeah, so I'm really looking forward to this series. I think it'll be a lot of fun. These two teams do not like each other. I think Milwaukee is extremely frustrated at what happened to them last year in the bubble, and is highly motivated to avenge their loss to this team. So it gives them a really good chance to start the playoffs on the right foot. And Milwaukee has the toughest road of any team in my mind to try to
Oh,
win a
absolutely.
championship. I mean, it's like a
Absolutely.
murderer's row. They have to go through Miami, then Brooklyn, I'm assuming, and then Philadelphia, and then probably the Lakers. So
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus Christ, is that a tough hill to climb?
Good luck to that.
Yeah. So, all right, let's look at the last series in the first round of the Eastern Conference. Sap, the for the most unexpected series, 4-5. The Atlanta Hawks are playing host to the New York Knicks. Two teams that I don't know if a lot of people had them in the playoffs to begin with, let alone the 4-5 seed. Both these teams, especially post All-Star break, have played terrific basketball, and really, I look at this as a true pick'em series, Sap.
It really is. 4-5 generally can be that, but you've got a lot of unknowns here. The Hawks haven't been to the postseason for several years. The Knicks have been to the postseason once in 15 or 20 years. I mean, the last time they were in the postseason was 2013 when they beat the Celtics in the first round. That's ages ago. That was before Brad Stevens was coaching the Celtics. Doc Rivers was the Celtics coach the last time the Knicks won a playoff series back in 2013. You've got like these mysterious stars now, like Julius Randle's going to probably finish top 7 or 8 in MVP voting. Trae Young is a guy that everybody knows a lot about, but we haven't been able to see. John Collins is a nice player. Tom Thibodeau is probably the leading candidate to win Coach of the Year, along with Monty Williams in Phoenix. But also, you got to give a lot of credit to Atlanta's coach, Nate McMillan, who took over midseason and went 27-11 down the stretch. He's going to get some votes for Coach of the Year, even though he only coached 38 of 72 games. So this is going to be a wild card of the series. The Knicks have home court advantage. There's so much excitement in New York right now because the Knicks are in the postseason. They absolutely trample the Brooklyn Nets in terms of excitement in the city, even though Brooklyn is the favorite to win the NBA championship. New York is a Knicks town. Brooklyn is still a Knicks town. And I think, the Nets, despite all that talent, are going to fall behind the Knicks in terms of coverage. I like Atlanta in this series because I still think when you get to the postseason, a guard can dominate in certain situations. And I think Trae Young is going to be really tough for the Knicks to match up against. Derrick Rose has been playing great, but he's a little long in the tooth. I can't see him keeping up with Trae Young. I know Julius Randle is exceptional, but I think John Collins has really elevated himself. Clint Capella, great rim protector, one of the top 5 rebounders in the league. I like Atlanta in this series. I think this goes 7. This is going to be kind of a fun, off the wall series where this is their championship, right? Because whichever team wins this series is going to play Philadelphia. We doubt either one of these teams could beat Philadelphia in the next round. So this is kind of their championship. And whichever team wins this series, it's a great year for that team. It's a stepping stone type of season for either the Knicks or the Hawks.
Yeah, my mistake is you're corrected that the Knicks do have home court advantage and
Right.
they're seated ahead. They have the same record, but they have the tiebreaker.
Yep.
The Knicks over Atlanta. So that series is actually going to start in Madison Square Garden. And Sab, you sent this to me. I didn't realize how much Knicks fever has captured New York. They've sold out 15,000 seats. They've done better than the Nets in terms of their ticket sales. Nets are actually selling them at half the price of the Knicks. I saw an advertisement that James Harden's running for the Nets, where if you use the checkout code Harden, they pay for half the Nets will cover half the ticket cost or something like that. So the Nets seem like they're struggling to sell tickets, and they're the prohibitive favorites, and the Knicks would be fortunate to get out of the first round, and yet they're showing it. It's a Knicks town. It's still a Knicks town.
Oh,
despite the fact they've been horrible.
Leaps and bounds. Yeah, I mean it's a Knicks town. First of all, they have a real famous fan base. Led by Spike Lee. Woody Allen in the past has always gone to games. Dustin Hoffman. I'm going with
I don't think they want Woody Allen there anymore.
Relevant. No, and Dustin Hoffman either, to go along with Charles Oakley. Apparently, maybe they're all banned from Madison Square Garden. But here are the Nets, who most people think are going to win the East, and many think will win the championship. They're giving tickets away at half price, or they're putting up half price label on tickets. James Harden's on Twitter, Instagram saying, hey, I'll pick up half the cost of the tickets for a playoff game against a legacy franchise. Now, I don't think anybody thinks the Celtics are going to beat Brooklyn, but there's got to be some hate against the Celtics in New York City, right? Where there's going to be enough people that are going to go to the Barclays Center and boo the shit out of the Celtics because it's the Celtics. And even then they're having trouble moving tickets, whereas the Knicks, they're going to be at about 75% capacity coming out of this pandemic. This kind of reminds me of the Cubs and White Sox in Chicago. The White Sox won a World Series in 2005, 11 years before the Cubs broke through. And the White Sox had a really long drought too. And no one talked about it. When the Cubs won the World Series in 2016, it almost made what the Red Sox did in 2004 pale in comparison. I mean, we remember in 2004 what it was like around here when the Red Sox finally broke through. It was like a endless celebration. Same thing in Chicago for the Cubs, but not the White Sox. Sometimes, a lot of these cities, it's 90-10 in favor of one of the franchises. In this case, it might be 95-5. I don't know many Nets fans. I know a lot of New Yorkers. I know very few Nets fans. First of all, they were based in New Jersey, not New York. And, they've had a decent history, but it goes back to Dr. J in the 70s. And they had a nice run with Jason Kidd and those guys getting to, some finals. But they never really threatened the Lakers or the Spurs in the finals. And here's the Knicks, who have been horrible for 2 decades. There's a lot of excitement in New York for the Knicks. But that's why this Atlanta Knicks series is going to be kind of fun, because it's kind of a bizarro series, isn't it? Like the Knicks are playing Atlanta in the playoffs, and what's going to happen. So I'm going to pick Atlanta because I think Trae Young may be the best player on the floor in this particular series.
Yeah, I could see that he could be the best player on the floor. I mean, he's a sieve defensively, but he's magical offensively. I mean, he's the closest sort of shot creator to Steph Curry I think there is in the NBA. I mean, he's a reasonable facsimile. He's nowhere he's not Steph Curry, but he's a reasonable facsimile.
Might be a better passer though.
He's a tremendous passer.
A tremendous passer. So I think if they can surround him with some more scorers, that he'll kind of hopefully peel back a little bit to try to not be so overly aggressive scoring, and that can open up things for him. I mean, you get him a couple of scorers, I think you're going to see how great this kid is. Although you're right, he's terrible on the defensive end, but that's a different argument for a different day. We know Steph's not very good defensively, and still he's going to finish top 3 in MVP voting.
No, I would be surprised if at some point Trae Young doesn't lead the league in scoring for a year or a couple of years. He's that gifted of a shooter. Yeah, I mean, he averaged double-digit assists in college, which nobody does. So,
that's incredible.
I mean, nobody does anymore. People used to do it. Yeah, I think it's going 7. Really, I agree with you there, Sap, too. I'll take the Knicks at home in a game 7. So I'll say Knicks in this series. typically that's it seems to be what happens. I like the defensive intensity they bring. I do think Atlanta has a better roster. I've said all year long. I think the Knicks. That's why I'm voting. I would vote for Thibodeau for coach of the year because I think their roster sucks. Outside of really Randall and RJ Barrett.
Mhm.
So I like who Atlanta has more personnel wise, but it just seems like the Knicks sort of year almost, right? Where
Mhm.
they should win a series. Either one of these teams is going to be, cannon fodder in the
Right.
next round. But I'll take if I since I believe it's going 7, I'll take the home team in the Knicks
Okay.
in that seventh game, and I'll take the defensive intensity, and I'll take Julius Randle to have a big game in that game.
So you have Philadelphia, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, and the Knicks advancing. I have the same top three: Philadelphia, Brooklyn, Milwaukee, and I have Atlanta advancing to the second round. So how do you see these playoffs filling out? Fill out your bracket for the Eastern Conference.
Well, I mean, I've been on Brooklyn all year long,
Hmm.
so I see. I think Brooklyn and Milwaukee will be a war. I
Yeah.
think that they pose the toughest matchup of anybody in the NBA to me to Brooklyn. So I will take Brooklyn in 6 in that because I had Brooklyn losing. I think I said three games overall.
Right.
Um, so 2 of them will be there. Um, so I'll say Brooklyn in 6 over Milwaukee. Then
Hmm.
I will take Philadelphia. I think will sweep the Knicks. Uh, so Philadelphia is really not going to be challenged for a while here. And then I'll take Brooklyn over Philly in 5 in the
Okay.
East.
All
I,
right. So you got Brooklyn representing the
they're
Eastern
just so
Conference.
good, Sap. I mean, I wish I wasn't picking them. I hate them. I hate everything they stand for. I hate that they took the regular season off and still managed to be the 2 seed. I hate that James Harden had years on his contract left and was able to still force himself to the specific team he wanted to. I hate that Kevin Durant can't, take any sort of criticism at all. You know why I hate Kyrie Irving, and yet I think that they're one of the best teams I've ever seen.
Yeah, I mean, the three of those guys in a half court offense together is pretty special because they fit together too. It's not as if they're going to stumble over each other. I think Harden makes it all work. I think he's the most important player on that team. They were 28-7 when he played for them this year. They were 6-2 when all three played together, and they were barely a 500 team when it was only Kyrie and Kevin Durant. So Harden is the most important player on the Nets. I didn't say he's the best player, but is the most important player on the Nets. I'm going to have Milwaukee upset Brooklyn in the second round in 6 games. I think Milwaukee is really zoned in here, and defensively, they're going to cause a lot of problems. I think Drew Holiday can at least make Kyrie Irving or James Harden have to work their asses off. And I think you can also maybe hunt those guys down on the other end of the floor with either Drew Holiday or Chris Middleton. And I think Giannis is just going to play out of his mind. There's nobody that can contain Giannis. Look, there's nobody that can contain Kevin Durant, but in a pinch, Giannis can match up against Durant and make him work for his baskets. I don't know of anybody on Brooklyn that could make Giannis really have to sweat to keep him under 35 or 40 points. I got Brooklyn losing to Milwaukee in the second round. Again, Philadelphia will breeze through. I think Atlanta, you say the Knicks. Philadelphia almost feels a little bit like the Patriots for many years, where they were the 1 seed in the AFC, got a bye, and then would play like Houston in the divisional round. And then they're sitting there in the AFC
Right.
conference finals, right? And AFC championship game because they had no one to face. That's kind of what Philly feels like. Like Philly should get to the conference finals in maybe 9 games, right? They may lose 1 game in the first 2 rounds sitting there. Meanwhile, Milwaukee's going to have to work their asses off to get there. And if it's Brooklyn, Milwaukee, which we expect in the second round, that's going to be a war. So I don't know. Is it better to just breeze through and have a lot of time off, or is it better to be, competitive right from the get go? I've got Milwaukee winning the East. I think Milwaukee's going to then beat Philadelphia. I just have a good feeling for what they're doing, and I think this is the year Giannis breaks through.
I would
Because
love that. Nothing would
I,
make me happier except for the
I think it's
Celtics going on a run, but
I think as
that's not
basketball
happening.
fans, you want to see that because it's so different than the way Brooklyn was built. Philadelphia was built pretty much organically. I mean, their 2 best players were drafted. I mean, we know
Yeah.
they tanked, but that's okay. And then they went
Milwaukee
out
and
and
Philadelphia, both
yeah,
organically.
and give Philadelphia credit. They looked at the end of last year and said, we need to get a better coach. They went and got Doc Rivers. They got a better general manager in Daryl Morey, and they understood what they needed to maybe put them over the top with, the likes of Seth Curry or Danny Green. They said these are two guys that that can shoot, and that's what we need to do to help Embiid and Ben Simmons. So I've got Philadelphia, Milwaukee. I got Milwaukee winning the East.
Yeah, what's interesting about Philadelphia is you could make a strong case that they talent downgraded in order to get better
Mhm.
fits for the team.
Yep,
I think
exactly.
most people would say Al Horford is still better than Danny Green, which was what that
Sure.
trade amounted to. And I think a lot of people would like Josh Richardson more than Seth Curry. But Seth Curry and Danny Green were just far better fits on this Philadelphia team. So it's okay to Danny Ainge doesn't understand this, but it's
No.
okay to make a trade that when you're trading maybe a more talented player for a player that fits on the roster better and has a specific role to play. Philadelphia from last year to this year, it's night and day in terms of the cohesiveness of the roster and how they look. I mean, they look like a legitimate championship contender this year. Last year, it looked like the wheels were falling off every week.
Jet, I like prime rib a lot, especially when it's cooked rare. I like ice cream a lot, but I don't like them together.
Yeah, that's a good point. So no ice cream on your prime rib. So you have
No.
Milwaukee. Listen, Sap, nothing would make me happier besides, like I said, the Celtics doing it. If Brooklyn is eliminated, oh man, I'll go to Milwaukee and celebrate with the Bucks. In that
Okay.
series, a Brooklyn Milwaukee series, Giannis is he does have to go off, and he
Yeah, he
cannot have
does.
bad games. He cannot play like he did against Miami last year.
And he's got to shoot 35% from three, which isn't asking much for most players. It is asking a lot for Giannis because he's just not a pure shooter, and he's got to shoot at least 75% from the free throw line because at the end of close games, they may foul him and put the pressure on him to hit foul shots. So he's got to hit 75, 80% from the free throw line. Look, I've called Giannis a giant version of Russell Westbrook. I mean, they may be the two best athletes in the sport. Giannis just happens to be, 7 inches taller. I mean, he's a physical freak. Like Westbrook, he busts his ass on every play. I think he is competitive. I think he's skilled, but I don't know if he knows how to win yet. And I think he's going to try to learn that. But I think Drew Holiday is a massive upgrade over Eric Bledsoe from a year ago, and that could put them over the top. Man, if they lose in the first round, though, Budenholzer's out, and Giannis is going to maybe sour on the entire situation. Milwaukee, despite that huge contract he signed last offseason.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've seen that contract extensions are essentially
Yeah.
meaningless in the NBA. When a star
Yep.
wants out, they get out. Period. That's
Yep.
how it works.
Very true.
Well, those are our picks for the East. Sap's got the Bucks. I have the Nets. I think we should reserve the right to reevaluate after each round. Take another look at it, Sap.
Sure.
Stick with our picks if we want, but I think it's fair to, if somebody gets hurt, you can change your pick. That seems more than fair.
Yeah, if someone pokes out LeBron's other eye or his
Oh,
other
for
ankle
God's
starts
sakes. We'll
throbbing,
talk about
my
LeBron
man.
in the West tomorrow,
All right.
okay?
Okay.
We almost went a whole show without, doing more LeBron talk. You had to ruin
Hey,
it right at the end.
I didn't bring up Aaron Rodgers, who's 1% owner of the Bucks, so I think that
That's true.
may work out well too. They get to the NBA Finals and Rodgers is sitting courtside, although he may be on the Denver Broncos by then. So we'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, right now he's trying to convince the Packers to trade for Julio Jones, saying that's the only way he'll stay there.
Well,
So, all right. Well, that's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. We are always presented by Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out our podcast on their website or wherever podcasts are found. And you can find our YouTube at youtube.com/JetStryer. Tomorrow, we'll be taking a look at the Western Conference playoffs, giving our picks there. I think you know where Sap's going with it, so maybe you don't even have to listen to him if you don't want to. You can just listen to what I have to say.
don't say that.
All right, we will be back tomorrow. Until then, see everybody.